We're Jesse and Gwen Richardson. We've been working with young adults in this church since the middle 90s, and we'd like to just share a couple of stories with you that means a lot to us. Miss Roxy brought a young lady, her name was Renita, up to visit Gwen and our class. Renita had this huge smile. When she smiled, it just warmed up the whole room. Renita had just gotten out of prison. She'd been in prison 10 years. She had been convicted of murdering her husband, whom had been abusing her horrifically. But while in prison, Renita had become a Christian. And it was easy for everyone in the class to see that Jesus was very, very real to Renita. But Renita had some needs. She needed a job. And so our class began to pray for her that Renita would get a job. And she got a job. She got a job at the hospital. She had to be out there at 5 a.m. in the morning. Well, that presented a problem. So the class began to pray for her. Renita needs a car.
Well, we had a woman in our church who had just gotten a car, and so now she had two. And so she knew about Renita's need, and she said, I'll give her my car. She came back that next Sunday and said, I did get a car. It needs some work. And God used our class and people within our class to help fix that car. And Renita entered our lives at a time with young adults who felt like, where can we be used? What can God do with us right now? And he showed us a young woman that we could help. It was so obvious when she walked into a room that God was faithful. And she taught our class. She taught our class to see that God meets needs. And he met needs through young adults in our class.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the only story.
About that same time, within a few weeks of that, we, at the conclusion of one of our worship services, we were asked to hold hands, and we don't do that very often. So we were eating lunch after the service, and our daughter, Jessica, who she was going to school in North Texas at the time, and she had driven down that morning to join us in the church services, but she was late, and so she had sat over on the side of the piano side on the last row by herself. And she had noticed that there was a young man along the back wall sitting in that pew by himself in the middle section. And so when it was asked to hold hands after the service, Jessica had a choice there. She could go straight across to some people she was more familiar with, but as she turned and looked at that young man, she said everything about his demeanor just said to her, leave me alone. But she said, for some reason, I thought, it just goes against my nature to want to approach someone that looks like that. But for some reason she did. And so she just reached out her hand, and he accepted her hand, and they held hands during the close of the ceremony. That afternoon, about 2:30 that Sunday afternoon, Kyle called the house, and he talked to Jessica, and he said, Jessica, did you hold the hand of a young man at the back of our service? Let me tell you what happened.
He said, this young man came down to see me after the service and told me his story. He said he's from Killeen. He was in the service, and he got up that Sunday morning and said, I think this is going to be the last day of my life. And but maybe I should go to church. Only he didn't have a church. But he remembered a friend that he had met in the service, and she had told him that she was from Athens and that her mom worked in the church office, and that if he was ever around, just come visit. And he said, I think I'll just drive to Athens, and he did. He said after the service, he still planned to kill himself, but he said, but that part of the service where Steve Aiken said, reach across the aisle, and he said, when this young woman took my hand, He said, never had I remembered anyone just coming and taking my hand. And he said, that made such an impression on me. And Kyle said, Jessica, I was able to lead him to Christ.
In the coming weeks, you're going to hear a lot about the Cool and Green initiative. And I don't know about the green part so much, but I know this has been a pretty cool place for 150 years. And it's a cool place because it is a church that offers out a hand to a stranger. And it is a church that offers grace to everyone. We'll hear a lot about air conditioning and maintenance projects. And this church does have to be preserved, but it has to be preserved so that there can be more of these stories that play out in the years to come over the next 150 years.
I'm glad that this initiative will help to preserve our church for the next 150 years. Because as I walk through those doors, I see people. I see the Miss Roxys, and I see the strangers that God has brought here, and how God has blessed our lives, and how we've been able to help people. I want everybody to have these same kind of stories.